Aloha family, we are live on X, Kick, Rumble, Instagram, quite a bit of others. Did I say Kick, Rumble? And also we're going to be live on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So for those of you that are here with us in a live stream, thank you for being here. I would definitely appreciate any type of sharing, reposting to get this out. It should be fun. We've got a very special guest today, and just want to do a little bit of housekeeping for anybody that is here today on a live stream. We're doing something a little bit different. We are going to do a podcast recording, but we're also going to include you guys as the audience to be able to kind of engage. So we're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to open up for questions later on in the broadcast. So while we're working everything out in the background, putting our phones on silent, making sure I got all my notes ready, we're going to get started. And here we go. Today's episode is brought to you by Archon Mounts. They are the premier mounting solutions, keeping your devices within reach. Whether you are a content creator, a medical professional, a weekend warrior, maybe you're a gig driver and, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, you're one of those heroes. Well, go to archon.com, get yourself a tripod or any mounting solution that you require to do your job with excellence. You could be maybe a professional photographer. They have DSLR mounts. Maybe you like to jump out of airplanes. They have actually GoPro mounts as well. Maybe you're an airline pilot. They actually have equipment and mounts for you if you're an airline pilot. And we're going to talk a little bit about flights in a little bit. So go to archon.com. Get yourself a really sturdy, robust tripod from Archon Mounts. Be sure for the promo code, put in Hawaii, and you get 20% off your entire order. That's archon.com. Also, family, our new merch is out. For those of you that don't know, we actually do have merchandise. If you go to my website, links are all in my bio, t-shirts, pickleball paddles, all that good stuff. And there's a lot of other stuff you can purchase through there. And thank you again for your support, and much appreciated. Once again, family, I just want to say thank you for those of you that have really connected with us over the years. We started this journey back in 2015 of live streaming, doing podcasting, content creation. And one of the spaces or the corners of social media that I've gotten very comfortable lately is doing podcasting. So today, family, we've got a very special guest. His name is Dr. John Streukens. I hope I said it. I should have double checked, but Dr. John Streukens, he is a clinical psychologist. I'm going to read his bio real quickly. So if you don't know who he is, you will after I read this. He spent over 3 decades providing treatment services to individuals, couples, and groups with psychological and substance use disorders. He has come to appreciate that every individual gets to make their choices. Some gain recovery and some don't. Paramount to the process is to be respectful, non-judgmental, and allow the individual to decide their recovery path based upon the best recommendations and resources available. He has an ability for compassionate understanding and directive dialogue that comes from years of experience. He's also an expert in clinical psychodiagnostic assessment. He's conducted well over 5,000 assessments in this area, and he continues to enjoy this work. And beyond this, Dr. John Streukens is a contract instructor at 2 universities and provides instruction in psychopathology, lifespan development, personality, theory of counseling, and intro to psychology. He is also engaged in providing clinical consulting services with first responder organizations. Family, there's a lot more to him than just a bunch of credentials and bios. He's actually I just found a way some cool little things that we connect on. So we're going to get a chance to meet with Dr. John in just a second. And once more, family, if you're enjoying this, do me a favor, make sure you click the follow button, repost this as well to all of my family and all the live stream platforms. Thank you for being here. We will be live with Dr. John in 41 seconds.
This whole town could be red by the end of the day. If you feel alright, we can throw it and drive. With the radio so loud they can hear us a mile. Me and you, nothing to do.
Dr. John. I hope did I say your name correctly? I should have asked earlier. Did I say it properly?
You did. That's some intro.
Oh, I'm glad I got it right because I should have asked him before. So
you
man,
you wouldn't be the first to have mispronounced it, nor will you be the last. But no, you did it perfectly. Thank you.
man, thank you for being here. Thank you for just hanging out, and I really appreciate you. It really means a lot. It really does. And you're actually the third clinical psychologist to be on my podcast, and obviously you do a lot more than just that, just from your bio. But I'm very grateful for you being here. So thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, you and I connected many a year ago through social media, and we've talked about doing this at different times over and over. So I'm actually glad we're finally here tonight and able to have a chat. So
Now, do you remember what year that was? Because I can't remember what year when we kind of started connecting.
it was pre-COVID, so it had to be before 2019. So it would have been. I'm just trying to think when I went on to. It was Periscope.
Periscope.
In fact, I see someone in our line who's someone who I connected with on Periscope years ago. Hearts and Stars is apparently here in one of the forms, I really don't remember what year we started on that. It was quite a while ago, though.
I just know that when you met me on social media, I was in a much different chapter of my life, and when we finally became pastors and we opened the drug and alcohol rehab, I remember we kind of had some slight little conversations, and I still remember that, and I appreciate that. I really do, for you reaching out. And I don't know if you know this, but that means a lot when someone, because I was brand new in that area, in the area of drug and alcohol rehab, and I know that's I'm just going through your website, and that's a very strong suit of yours. That's a strong area of expertise.
Yeah, that's my passion. And so when I saw that you were doing that, I thought, and I try and reach out to people that are, especially in the areas that I'm passionate about, to just offer them information or the ability to ask question, and so I thought, well, I know you. We have watched your scopes over and over and over, and so thought, yeah, I'll get a hold of you. And I was happy to see that you were doing that too on the island. That was probably, I assume that was the first, if not a very unique experience for the island.
It was definitely the first for Hope Center Ministries. I think they have, by to date, I think 30 centers around the world. So they have in the UK, and most of them are in the mainland United States. And it was definitely the first in Hawaii to have a discipleship program,
Right.
kind of a work program that was Christian based, but it wasn't, exclusionary. It's obviously very inclusive, because it wasn't a requirement for them to be a quote unquote Christian, right? So, but yeah, it was exciting. It was a very great chapter of my life. Our background, my wife having a history with drugs and not alcohol, but more so drugs, with her history. So it was dear to our heart. So I got to ask before we get into the meat and potatoes. Did you see any planes landing while you were waiting?
Yeah, I did have time to log into Flight Radar and watch the Calgary airport for a few minutes. My favorite airport, though, has got to be Chicago Midway. It's just sort of the right amount of busyness. There's the right amount of planes going in and out. You log in and go over to like O'Hare or down into LAX, and it's more stressful to watch than it takes away the enjoyment.
So are you aware of the I forgot what it was, but there's a code. So when they land, sometimes the pilots will ask, "Hey, is it de-iced number 1 or 3?" There's numbers, and they'll announce it on a radar. Are you aware of those de-icer codes?
No, I haven't got that far into it yet. I know of the is it ATC, whatever, the broadcast system where you can pick up towers from almost any airport other than the UK. The UK, do you know why? I don't know why. the UK, you can't pick up their airports.
I don't. They're weird. They have some weird regulations, for sure. It's funny you say that because I used to be, well, I am a drone pilot, but there's a video of I think it's the UK airport, one of the airports in the UK, where a drone pilot went too close.
Oh no.
And it shows all the flight patterns. They're all going in a circle until they can figure out where the drone is at, and then they all come in for landing. It's a funny video.
Yeah, you go into their airspace and you mess it up pretty quick.
So I guess I gave you your first assignment. Go learn what those de-icer codes are. I think there's 1 through 5. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, up here that would be applicable in Canada.
I do know that the number is in direct correlation to the length of the de-icing activation time frame or period. And some of them de-ice quickly, but they ice up fast. And then some of them take a while to de-ice, but they actually last longer. So if a pilot's, let's say 20 minutes out, then they kind of figure out what de-icer to use.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and you can go ahead and expound on it.
Okay.
DSM-5, for those of us that are of the different population, can you walk us through the DSM-5?
as best I can in a short period. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, put out by the American Psychiatric Association, and we are in 5TRX. So there's a addition that's been an update that was done to DSM-5. So there is a few extra letters to it, and it identifies all of the range of possible diagnostic disorders that are available to the field of psychology and psychiatry. And each disorder is explained in detail, from the criterion needed to meet that disorder to the incident rates. If there are any cultural features that research has become aware of, that information is listed, as well as onset and course. So when this disorder typically develops and what pattern it will generally take, as well as treatment. So it's a complex book, but it's also it's extremely helpful in so much that if another qualified psychologist has done an assessment and says somebody has, let's say, major depressive disorder, we all know what they're talking about then. We all know what criterion they had to meet to get that diagnosis. And we also all know what is the typical treatment pathway.
So for someone like me, if I want to go to Amazon and go buy this book,
yep,
would it be Pakistani for me, or would I be able to actually understand it?
No, you'd be able to understand it. It's, it's an interesting book. Here's every psychologist has one on their book, so that's the size of it. So
that's a weekend read. I can read that in a couple of days.
A bit of weight to it, but yeah, you'd understand it, and it is interesting. I've read through it obviously numerous times, because when I started my career, we at least weren't at DSM-1. I'm not that old, but I've had a chance to go through the editions in detail, and they are interesting. There are some unique disorders too in the world that occur very rarely, which is nice, but some of them are quite interesting.
So would I be incorrect in saying that if I say disorder, that this is probably a very elementary explanation, but because my wife and I were talking about our son, we'll talk about him in a second, but when I say someone has a disorder, that means that something is out of order. That's probably a very vague or very blunt definition, not even the right definition. But I just feel like if I say I have a disorder, that means something is wrong, or there's something out of order in my genetics or mental or something to that effect. Would that be a fair way to approach that?
Yeah, that'd be a fair statement. I mean, there are criterion that, like when we talk about the DSM, to stay with it too, for something to be listed in the DSM, and there are certain criterion that have to be met for it to go in, of which, of course, is the feature that somebody is psychologically distressed by whatever is occurring in their world, either thought-wise or behaviorally or mood-based. There also has to be features of it being unusual or abnormal to the culture. So it's not a culturally either acceptable or standard behavior. And so, and then of course from there we get into the criterion, but there are features that, and so yeah, being out of order, that there is something for an individual that thought, mood, behavior wise isn't functioning the way that would be typical.
You know, I grew up in the 80s. I'm a product of the 70s and 80s. And I don't remember, of course, I was probably naive on top of that, but I don't remember there being so many different diagnoses when I was growing up. And I feel like today there's a lot of so many different types. And one of the ones I was going to ask you about was autism. I don't remember there being such a heavy amount of people having autistic type characteristics. Is that true, or is that just me, like, subjective point of view?
No, I think there's a couple features. One is that I think we became more aware of sets of behaviors that, when combined together, would what we would say place someone on the spectrum, place somebody on the spectrum of autism. And so I think just through greater awareness and then research and people coming together and more in that realm, oftentimes it was parents and or teachers, the educational system that was seeing certain features that then, again, as I said, they started to do research on and realize that this is in fact something that is impairing to an individual's both their development as well as social features and other things. So I don't know if it was, I mean, I go back to the 70s and 80s as well, and I don't know if the numbers, I'd have to even look myself on that one, if they've been going up over time, like if we are in fact having greater diagnostics in that area particularly. That I don't know. I know that, again, part of the, once you develop a diagnostic disorder, obviously it's going to go up because of that. You have now a form or a placement for something that you might not have had before. So in other words, many of them may have been put as just behaviorally problematic, or oppositional defiant disorder, which is someone who doesn't interact or play nice, so to speak, is the best way to describe it for a young person. And I think some of the people that may have been autistic would have been probably dropped into a different area, a different bucket. And now we have a bit better way to hopefully assess people so that they're getting also then which is more important, the treatment that will help them on the other side. Because, yeah, treating somebody with autism the same way you would treat oppositional defiant disorder would be hugely problematic to the person with autism.
You know, I raised my hand and pointed at myself because I did a podcast with my dad, and my dad publicly stated on this podcast, Dr. John, that they thought I was autistic because I didn't talk until I was 5. Yeah, honey, I was like 5 years old. And they didn't know back then. They didn't have all of this research and studies and all that stuff. And I even had asthma as a kid. And my dad's way of dealing with my asthma, whenever I had an asthma attack, he would slap me in the back and pound my back, and he would yell, cough it out, you know? So that's the fabric that I'm from, right? So
right. Did you come from a big family?
Just me and my brother, just one end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I asked because if you were from a large family, it's not unusual, especially for younger children, not to speak until later, because the older ones are usually doing it for them. And so they usually pick up their expressive language later in life.
That's a good point. And I want to talk about my son. I think my wife wants to ask a question too, but the word spectrum, And I don't intend to offend anybody, but I've been hearing that a lot over the past couple of years. And I feel like it's been a word that's been thrown out there and just desensitized. People say, oh, I'm on the spectrum. Like it's either a joke or they take it lightly. Can you explain to me, like, what exactly does it mean when you say someone is on the spectrum?
Well, if it was stated clinically, it would mean that they meet criterion for autism, and whether that's mild, moderate, or severe. And so the more importantly, what you're referring to is happening in large scale with a lot of different disorders. People commonly claim to be depressed without ever having been diagnosed as being depressed, or having an anxiety disorder because they looked up Google and decided that they too had an anxiety disorder. And so there's a lot of self-diagnosing going on, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's important to always sort of do your own research, especially on your own mental and physical well-being. But at the same time, it's imperative, if you believe that something is in fact true or real for you, to then go get that explored with a professional, rather than just throwing these terms out, because they end up becoming misused by many people then. And that's, especially, as I said, the two biggest in the 80s. If you'll remember this, the word being stressed, everybody was stressed, and everybody talked about being stressed, and everyone also talked about going to their shrink or their therapist, and had those conversations in the lineups in the bank, usually as more of a status statement of, I have my own therapist. And now the terms are some of the more clinical ones that are being used at the advent, of course, the internet in 95 or 94, when it became much more readily available to people. Individuals then did, again, as I said, started doing some of their own self analyses. But it'd be akin to, and probably the disturbance I have with the mental health ones, if somebody looked up and determined that they might have pancreatic cancer, they wouldn't just walk around going, well, I have cancer. They would go and make sure that they have or don't have a diagnosis of that. But with mental health, people feel inclined to be able to just throw these terms out like it doesn't matter. And for people who have these disorders too, it can be quite distressing to them that someone is using it so flippantly.
Well, if someone is using it flippantly, I would make the argument that it might be indicative of another disorder.
Yeah, yeah, yes, it might. You are correct.
I mean, you never know. I mean, you never know.
Good point.
But I'll say this: my son has what is it, honey?
Sensory processing disorder.
So sensory processing disorder, and actual diagnoses. And for years, I would not, and just as a father, because I didn't understand it, but I would not, you can ask my wife, I would not speak that or declare that. I felt like I'm not going to declare that over my son. But as time progressed, I started to understand a little bit more on that whole sensory, that importance of that sensory for him to have that touch. And do you have a lot of experience with people that have that sensory processing disorder?
No, primarily because I spent the bulk of my career working with adults, not the whole of my career, but the bulk of it. And for the most part, something like that is something that is seen more as a childhood diagnosis, and not that it necessarily goes away, but the treatment and the treatment providers are usually child psychologists.
Mm-hmm. The reason why I was asking is because there are some dots that I've heard in conversations where they try to connect the dots to autism, people that have that. And I don't know what types, I haven't looked up studies or if there's a natural connection between that and autism. I personally don't believe that, but like I said, I haven't studied it into any degree whatsoever. So
And the connection might be, because it's not unusual when individuals have um, uh, different processing and disorders along that or in that area, that they have co-occurrent disorders. So not necessarily that these are tied directly to each other, but someone may have two or three disorders at the same time. And so it's a matter of sort of looking for the symptomology of the other disorder that someone might believe exists. And if those are being seen, then again, go for an assessment to determine the validity of that.
that, there's some people in our family that have exactly what you just talked about. And it seems like so my son and his cousin are very similar, and his cousin has a little bit more to that. And they've been finding some other things where he started developing a tick, I think they call it, where he just starts doing these ticks. And as a parent, it's so outside of the treatment of, like, obviously seeing a medical professional with those areas of autism, do you work with parents as well in conjunction? Or let's say they have someone that's maybe an adult, like what's her name, that famous actress? Oh, I used to have a crush on her, Dr. John. My wife is giving me the big eye. What is her name? She was on.
I'm not just going to start throwing out names, or I'm going to get in trouble on my side. So I'll just wait till you land there.
She was a mermaid in the 80s. Splash.
Daryl Hannah.
She came out years later saying that she has autism.
Okay.
And people were blown away that, and she always kept it a secret because she felt that she would not get the jobs, right?
Right.
But who knew? I mean, when I was a kid, like, oh man, this is my future wife, maybe. But thank God she's not. My wife is looking at me. Yeah. I want to talk about. Let's shift gears. We got to talk about, as Matthew, you gave me the topics, but we talked about Portland and different cities with the decriminalization of. So in Portland, they decriminalize every single drug or basically any drug that you can get out on the street, except for fentanyl. So if you call it fentanyl, it's still considered a criminal offense. They, for lack of a better word, they totally wrecked that city in that short time frame that they allowed that to happen. Have you experienced that in where you're at in any of the cities close to you?
Well, BC, Vancouver did the same thing, which is west of where I am, and had the same outcome. The east side of downtown in Vancouver was already a problem area, and when they did this, it just amplified it 100-fold. I believe they're trying to walk it back right now, but with some opposition. People are now, or at least many of the people that are probably the more outspoken on it, which are the ones that are wanting to keep status quo, are being quite loud about not having it go back to where it was before. I suspect that even if they're going to be loud about it, that won't help. That people are seeing that the result of this hasn't been positive, that in fact it's been highly detrimental to many of the people with addiction. It's been highly detrimental to the communities. The communities themselves have sort of degraded severely, and so I suspect that it will get turned back, and it's going to take some work, but it's the right way to go. Like the other experiment just didn't work, and I don't know why, given, as you said, Portland, Vancouver did this after that. So it's not like they already didn't have an example of how badly this can go and still move forward, which behooves me onto why they make those decisions, but they did.
Now, was it political in your area as well, or was it?
We're how do I describe where Alberta is a unique province in Canada. Lack of a, we're the wild west. We're the problem child to the country. The province that I'm in probably has the most conservative perspectives across the whole of the country, and so like we generally have opinion different than other provinces, and maintain that too, though.
The comment you said is that they want to walk it back. Portland's the same way. I don't know how they're going to walk it back, because a lot of that came. The things that came with that was funding, right? So a lot of it was obviously political, and then of course it was an experimentation that had gone severely bad to the point where, and this is, I don't get political. I could care less about the politics of it because I'm not from here, so I could care less about the politics of Oregon. But I do see it where even in the media where they talked about even the people that pushed this proposals, they know that it was a mistake. And now it's like, how do you go back from that? Now you've gotten, I don't know what the numbers are, because I don't know if they even going to publish any numbers, like how many more people got hooked on these drugs that were not criminalized, and how do you walk back from that? Because I don't know if you have a solution how to walk that back, but
no, I wish. We've been in this, which is still ongoing, the opiate epidemic that has gripped all of North America, and for years. And we aren't any closer to any solution on how to resolve that, on how to fix that issue when we're having, in the US, it's hundreds of thousands of people dying every year from overdose. The sheer numbers to this just are above belief that this is where we are, and that we don't have a solution. I've heard one person explain it. Imagine if the airline industry was killing 100,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Do you think somebody would step in and fix the problem? Well, the answer is yes. Like that just wouldn't be permissible. But we have 100,000 addicts dying, and some of them they actually don't have a substance use disorder. They may be trying it for the first time and end up overdosing and dying as a result. But that problem would be fixed if it were something else, which is also, given that my most passionate area is substance use issues, that this is continuing as long as it has without some form of a solution or resolution to it.
So here's a question. So for the listeners or viewers that may not know, how would you define an opiate? Like, what does that cover? What type of drugs does that cover?
Well, it covers both. It's the opium.
Right.
The raw form of it all the way through, which is the more problematic areas, which are the synthetic opiates. And those are available easily in any major center, or rural for that matter. So falling into it, Percocet is part of the opiate family. Oxycodone, OxyContin, again, these are, and there's the other. Let me be clear on them. From a pain management perspective, when used properly, and that's the key, when used properly, these can return somebody's life to them, somebody with a pain management disorder. Unfortunately, as I think everyone knows, there was some nefarious activity around the whole area several years ago, which increased the utilization rates, and then from there it's just taken off, and that's where we've lost containment of it. And unfortunately, that's what again is contributing to having these ongoing large overdose ratios, including, part of it too is, if there wasn't the demand, there wouldn't be the use, and there is a large demand for it. You hear all the various governments talking about South America pushing all these substances into our countries. The reality is if there wasn't a demand there, they wouldn't be pushing them here. So
Without
that might be the bigger question: is how do we get rid of the demand? How do we, and that one again, I don't know if that'll ever happen, because as long as we've sort of walked the earth, we've explored for substances that alter mood and alter behavior, and we fought large scale wars historically. The opium wars that's what they were. They were for who could have the right to the roots of distribution.
So I was going to refrain from going to because it could be considered a conspiracy theory, but the Sackler family, very wealthy off of that industry.
Oh, many people became very rich and still are.
Yeah.
And there's the other side. My wife and I always say when we're looking, especially conspiracy, follow the money. Just go watch for where and you'll find your answer, because usually it's attached to some form of greed. The human beings have a knack for falling into that area, but there's money on both sides of this.
Right.
There's a huge amount of money on the distribution and usage side, and there's a huge amount of money on the treatment side. And so people, for lack of a better term, people are winning on all sides here.
I had shingles, I think I was in my mid-30s. And I went through what I believe, I didn't go get diagnosed, or I just really felt in that very dark place just because I wasn't working. I was not physically able to work. And I had to, shut all the doors and windows, make it dark. So I had that sensitivity, obviously the pain.
Yeah, the pain is something. I had shingles when I was in my 30s as well. And when it first hit, I was playing hockey then. Sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead.
I was playing hockey then. And I thought I had pulled my groin because it was so sore after a hockey game. And I thought, I must have done something. And then 2 or 3 days later, I thought, well, usually I'm back to normal before we get back out on the ice. And it wasn't fixing. And then my back, the pain in my back, and I looked in the mirror, and I had that rash.
That's the worst.
It looked like somebody took a blowtorch to my lower back, and I'd never felt pain like that before. So I know exactly what you're speaking about.
I heard that's the worst, to have it in your back, because how do you sleep? It's crazy. My dad had it recently. I had it in my 30s. And mine was on the right side. But I remember, I can't even remember what I took, but I remember the doctor said, hey, I'm going to prescribe you this, and you just take X amount. Obviously, it was an oxy or hydrocodone, one of those two.
Yep.
And I felt great. I ain't going to lie. I was like, I feel amazing. And I slept good. I still was out of work for almost a month.
Yep.
It didn't matter how good I felt. My body wasn't healing fast enough. So I know that feeling, and we talk about the Sackler family. I did look them up. First I thought, oh, they're just conspiracy, theorizing this. But then when I looked them up, there's a lot of things tied to the money and the family, where they knew what they were doing and still pumping more, and even paying it off whoever they need to pay off to make sure that they have distribution rights, almost exclusively in the United States.
And I know part of the other sort of facet to all of that was the whole area of not just sort of the distribution features and factors, was that individuals, I mean, once they get connected to one of these substances, and if it lasts a moderate level of time, and you probably wouldn't have experienced it with shingles, it wouldn't be long enough, but they develop tolerance very quickly. And that feeling that you just spoke of, which is what people experience usually the first time they ever take especially a strong opiate, never comes back though. Once tolerance is built up, they don't get that back again. And so, I mean, that's the adage. People say that many of them are chasing that first high. They're trying to get that, and they'll never land there again because their body has adapted to the substance itself. And people can get to, which again we know, really high levels of intake of this stuff. Whereas if someone just without regular use of it took the amount that they take in a day, they'd be dead. Like there'd be no, but their body has developed tolerance.
So if they're not getting that initial high, what is the addictive part that they're so addicted to if they don't have that first love, if you will? What, like,
part of it is avoidance of withdrawal. That's a big part.
okay.
That withdrawal is, especially to the opiates as well as benzodiazepines and opiates are probably the most horrific things to withdraw from. I used to work many years ago in a detox facility and watched people withdraw from substance. Most of the people on like heroin, morphine, or the opiates would actually walk out of treatment as soon as withdrawal kicked in fully, which would be at about sort of the 24-hour mark. Not that they wouldn't be starting withdrawal before that, but by about the 24-hour mark, one person explained it to me. They said, imagine your worst foot cramp, multiply that by 100 and put it through your whole body, as well as all the other stuff that's happening, and they walk out and use. And so part of what happens now is most people with opiate addictions are medically managed through different, it's medically supported recovery, where they're given Suboxone or one of the medications that helps offset withdrawal so that they can stop whatever substance they're using. Part of the problem to that, though, is they don't make plans on getting off the Suboxone. And to me, that can be a problem, so that they end up on that for life, which I'm not sure the issue's resolved for them, but that's for them to decide. But in any event, my recommendation to most people is don't stop opiates by like just cold turkey. It would be horrific. They oftentimes actually use the benzodiazepines to help also support people during detox. It makes the symptoms more tolerable if you're on Xanax or Ativan, which they then stop as soon as detox stops too. So there are ways for this to happen, and there's ways for it to happen medically safe, and there's ways that it can happen that, if not done right, could actually kill somebody.
Well, one of the things I learned, in Hawaii when we opened that drug rehab center was, of all the drugs, because I would take somebody in, and whether we would pick them up from a detox or from the jail, from the prison, we would bring them in the center. First question I ask them, when's the last time you got high? And it's the same answer every time. Oh, it's been months. And of course we do the UA and the whole thing lights up, right? We have an 18-pounder that we would run.
Yep.
And like 7 or 8 are just lit up, It's like, this guy just told me he's been clean. So, and we kind of already know. But the one that I found that is the most horrific for them to overcome and come down from is either heroin or lifelong alcoholism. Like, they just want to die. It's like they probably are dying, really, actually, from the way you described it. And heroin is a nasty, man, that's a nasty drug for anybody to come down from. I learned that just firsthand. Actually, he's a friend of ours in Hawaii. We recovered from that. So
Yeah, and that's why I said heroin with, I mean, and any of it's the same thing. It's the same sort of physiological mechanisms that are being strained and taxed during that. And you're right, alcohol, of course, is um, uh, moderate to long-term alcohol use disorder it's actually one of the more dangerous ones. If a person goes to come off that by themselves, they could actually die. They can end up having any number of things from cardiac events to alcoholic seizures during withdrawal. I watched one guy in detox. I'll never forget this. He was a big man. He was like 6'7", and I don't know why we had metal beds in detox, but they were all connected together, but it was a metal framework. And he had an alcohol seizure while he was walking to the kitchen and fell over and hit right the corner of one of these beds, forehead first, and just split his head. While we were there, which was good. We got the ambulance there and took him to the hospital. But had he had that seizure, let's say out on the street and fallen on concrete,
oh,
like that would have been it.
he would have been meeting his maker.
Yeah,
for sure. My wife just wrote me a note that my Uncle Chuck had that. He passed away just recently. Yeah, he had that lifelong alcoholism. And you're talking about the detox center. I know in Hawaii they shut down all the detox centers during COVID for a period of time, and that was yeah, it was crazy during COVID because of staffing issues. And the state had Hawaii, I believe, was the last state to lift all COVID restrictions from a governmental level on the private enterprise and everybody.
Right.
And man, when they shut down those detox centers, that was crazy. Because so you guess where they went? They went to the prisons. They went to
right.
Yeah. And that's where we picked up a few of our clients. Was we would go to the detox centers, and then when they shut down, but that alcoholism is it's right up there with heroin. And we had a guy that we brought in from the mainland. The family flew him out. We had to keep him in a separate facility on property, away from everybody, and we had to just keep checking up on him. And in hindsight, looking back, I don't even know why we did that, because we were not qualified to do that. If he had died in his room, oh my gosh, we would have been in some deep water.
Yes. Yeah, he should have been in a medical detox. And there is and they do have all different levels of detox, from what you just described, where the treatment centers sometimes just have their staff oversee someone's withdrawal, but they're usually very careful in screening who they'll let in at that level. And then there are, of course, the medical detoxes, which I worked in one of those, and that's the safest way to detox, is to have access to medicine, but also have somebody medically monitoring your physiology while you're withdrawing. Because again, one of the benefits, especially if we stay with alcohol, many will have a stroke. Their blood pressure will start to just shoot through the roof during withdrawal. And because we would be monitoring them, we would be able to call 911, get the medics to come out and take them over to the hospital before that would happen. We would see that all the features of what would probably going to be ending in a stroke are happening. So let's get them to a hospital to get that managed immediately.
My wife wrote down a statement in regards to, we're talking about alcoholism and just dependencies in that nature. It's very generational, right, for Native Hawaiians with indigenous families, right? So there's a lot of history in that, where it's just a cycle. Now, where you live, have you had cases where we dealt with families? I don't know what type of indigenous or we call them First Nations. Do you guys have a demographic like that where you are in your practice?
Do we? Oh, yeah, we have. I didn't know if there was still more to that question. We do have a First Nation population, and quite large. For the most part, there are First Nation treatment facilities as well, and typically many First Nation people will prefer to go to a First Nation facility rather than to a just the public system, and so there isn't a lot of integration on that. It's not that it doesn't happen, but many people that are First Nations would prefer to have treatment that is inclusive and respectful of their culture.
I say that's fair because I think Hawaii is very similar.
Yeah.
Although we don't have a wealth of services available, and I don't want to go too sideways in this, but to go back to we were talking about the dependencies and the opiate crisis. Where do you see us headed at this point? We talked about the cities, we talked about Portland, we talked about BC. Where do you see us headed? Like, where is the light at the end of the tunnel in what we're talking about in that respect?
I think, where we're headed is that we're, again, for as long as there's been humans, there's been some form of a substance that humans will take to alter their state of reality. So I don't think that's ever going to go away. And there's always been a percentage of those people that end up then with a substance use disorder. And so I don't think that's going to change either. That in fact, I often encourage the new group of psychologists coming in to specialize in this area, because I say you'll never be out of work. Like, there's always going to be people that use and misuse substances to the point that it becomes problematic, and they need help to get out of that, and they need respectful, compassionate help to get out of that. They don't need somebody judging them. They don't need somebody telling them what a bad human being they are. And so I see that's going to remain the same. One thing that's really on the rise, at least in Canada, probably in part because it's legalized, is marijuana. And it used to sit in the sort of the top five substances of use. So not abuse necessarily, but use. It was sort of traditionally, and for the last 30 some odd years, in the third position. It's now climbed to number 2. Now, I don't know if it'll ever take. Alcohol's number 1. At about 82% of Canadians will consume some amount of alcohol in any given year. Marijuana, they're currently saying it's at 21%. I suspect that's low. I suspect that is an underrepresentation of the number of people that are using that substance here in Canada, just from what I see in treatment, but also what I see up at the university when I'm on the university property, and people, because it's legalized, which is still bizarre to me. There are a number of students that'll go out to the cigarette smoking doors and go smoke a joint in between classes, which would be akin to going outside and grabbing a rum and coke or a brandy, which we wouldn't see happen, but they feel able to do this with marijuana or the vaping of it. And so I think that's going to be on the rise, and probably it'll stay in number 2, but it's going to go up. It's probably going to get into the 40 to 60% range.
I think alcohol will always be number 1 in Canada because it's always cold there.
It's not always cold here.
I'm just kidding.
We have a few cold months, but like 6 of them. But other than that,
you can't lie to me, Dr. John, because I got a Canadian in here. Her name is Sarah. She showed me her summer pictures. It's snowing in summer. Like, what the heck? But yeah,
it does sometimes snow in summer. I just saw Sarah make a comment. It was 70 degrees here. To see that's a warm day. That's a nice day in Canada. 70s, just sort of perfect.
Hey, with all due respect to all my fellow Canadians, I I'm a typical local brought up, born and raised in Hawaii. I've been in Oregon long enough to the other day, we were like, why is it so hot? And it was like in the 60s. And we were like, why is it so hot? And I was sweating. All of my family in Hawaii would be like, what is wrong with you? At 65 in Hawaii, we're pulling out our heaters.
See,
So,
you adapt to it. Like
yeah,
I'm as you said, like when it gets to about 65 degrees, I turn the air conditioning on in my car. I'm going, oh man, it's warm in here today.
I'm sweating. And my wife is part Puerto Rican, so we're naturally hot to begin with. But I don't think we're Canada ready yet. But so going back to the alcohol, I do believe alcohol. I mean, so with the marijuana, what are I don't even know because I've never smoked marijuana. I've never had an opportunity. Well, okay, let me rewind. I've had many opportunities.
You live in Hawaii. You
Yeah.
cannot tell me you've never had
So
opportunity to smoke pot.
okay, let me rewind. I've had many opportunities, but I've never had the temptation strong enough to partake in that activity. Although I don't, demonize anybody that does. Hey, if that's where you're at, that's fine. That's just not for me. I don't need it, or I don't want it. But what are the negatives if it does take the place of alcohol? It does become number one in Canada. Like, are there anything negative ramifications of that? Because I know you're the one that brought it up, but is there a negative side to that?
I mean, the negative side to it is that especially marijuana today, when Canadians voted on legalizing this, a high percentage of them were products of the 60s. A high percentage of the populace at that time. So the late 60s and the 70s, when the toxicity, so the THC levels were really low, like they were in sort of 7% or 10%, whereas now they're like 85 or 90%. So what they were voting on was what they believed marijuana to be, which when they used it, they could smoke a whole joint to themselves, get a little munchies, and go watch some TV. If somebody smoked a whole joint to themselves with today's toxicity, they're likely to have some pretty good hallucinations and other features of psychosis or hallucinatory kinds of experiences. And so it's not the same substance. And that's part of it is that if it keeps going up, I mean, what we're seeing too is we're seeing more people coming into treatment. I oversee the psychodiagnostics at a few treatment centers, and we're seeing more people that are coming into treatment just for cannabis, just for cannabinoids. Like they don't have an alcohol use disorder. Whereas many years ago, we'd see a lot of people come in with an alcohol use disorder and some issues with pot, but not a whole bunch. Now we're seeing and so if that number keeps going up, because alcohol is not coming down. So if that number keeps going up, what's going to happen is the demand on our treatment resources is also going to be, not that it's not already heavily sort of taxed system, meaning overrun with need versus ability to treat. And that'll keep rising. And we already are in a place here in Alberta. I mean, one of the benefits to being an Albertan is treatment is free here. We don't have to pay for treatment. If somebody needs treatment for a substance use disorder, we have hundreds of treatment centers that are funded by the government, which it's funded by tax dollars then, so everybody's paying. But people aren't having to spend the kinds of money like in the US, as you know, you're looking at minimum $35,000 for treatment. I mean, it's not cheap. You go to Betty Ford, you're probably, I don't know the current rates, but it'd be somewhere around probably $65,000.
I'm in the wrong profession. You have any job openings?
You were moving into treating addiction, and
Yeah.
See, maybe you needed to stay.
Dr. Heath posted up a comment. I think you've seen it. I put it up. I'll pop it up again. He says that
I
he's
like
still,
that man. He's a very pleasant man.
yeah, he's all right. He's so vain on himself. But he said, I have patients still suffering many years later from the effects of THC related psychosis.
Yes. And that again is something that's newer, that wasn't nearly as prevalent if we go back to the 60s and 70s. Like, again, the toxicity levels here are really high. And I just saw Sarah put a comment in the chat that I will speak to because it's so significant. Yes, there are so many people that if you aren't buying it, see, here in Canada it's legal, so you can go to the store and buy your marijuana. But if you're buying it from somebody who isn't a legal distributor, unfortunately, many of them are putting either fentanyl, ox, their ecstasy. They're putting other substances in it, in part so the person believes that their high is that much more significant. So this must be really good pot. No, it's being laced with something else. And of course, the issue is, which contributes to overdose, is drug dealers aren't necessarily the most attentive people in the world. And the way I describe it to my classes is, you bake a sheet of cookies and you want chocolate chip cookies, and the ideal number is 6 chips. Well, unfortunately, somebody's going to get 15 chips, and whoever gets
Yeah.
that one dies. And that's
Yeah.
what happens sometimes with this, is that someone gets their marijuana laced and somebody's not being attentive to what goes into it. And all of a sudden we have another dead person.
That's a whole nother discussion in the area of shenanigans and governmental so where we live, there's not a lot of diversity in terms of ethnic diversity, right? So I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino. So whenever I see any type of brown skinned person, I always go, what are you doing here? And so when I see Chinese people, I'm like, where do you guys live? Like, what are you doing here? And I'm making light of it, but there was an article in a paper. There's this town about 30 minutes to the east of us. In the paper, it said that a Chinese drug operation, there's a sting operation where they were selling marijuana. And I found it so strange, that in the middle of a farm town, basically, all white people, they found a Chinese drug operation in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, there's so much of that I think that goes unseen. And like what you said, like, somebody's going to get those 12 chocolate chips.
Right. Well,
Right?
I know there have been areas, there are other people in the US that I connected with through Periscope that lived in some different rural spaces. And during the height of sort of the epidemic of all of this, they were having so many deaths in their community at one point that they were using the ice hockey rink, and then they ran out of space there. The morgue was so full that they just couldn't house anymore. And then they ran out of space in the ice hockey rink. Like, there were just too many bodies for being processed. Like, that's a problem when it's at that level, obviously.
They would have to rename that hockey rink, because I wouldn't play there
Yeah.
ever again.
Yeah.
That's insane that they would have to, and that's straight ice, right? Just put the bodies right there and we'll figure out what we got to do with them later.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, that clearly was speaking to the level of issue when that's what a community was having to do. So,
And you guys are dealing with the legal side of it to help people, right? And we've got that going on the back end of that. Someone posted in the comments, that's terrifying. I know that was an older comment, but hearts and stars, and that's your buddy, your friends. So with all of that, I feel like there's a bleeding that's happening. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got amazing people like yourself and Dr. Heath who are helping legitimate people overcome these things in a healthy way. Do you ever feel like you're up against like a tsunami or a tidal wave when we talk about stuff like this? Do you ever feel overwhelmed in that respect?
Part of it is I don't think I ever let my lens get there. I just
Okay.
look at what's in front of me. I know that I'm probably a bit unusual as a psychologist in so much that I fire clients. I only have so much time and so much ability, and can only when I don't see people clinically anymore, but when I did, which was 35 years of it, um, if they weren't motivated to make change, it wasn't a judgment on them, but I truly, as you read in the intro, I'll let people make any decision they want about it's their life. So
Right.
if you want to choose to continue to use substances or whichever, or use them or believe you can use them minimally while you're got one foot in recovery and one out, um, I'll suggest you go see somebody else. And because I only have so much time, so much energy. I want someone in front of me that's motivated to change, and I'm jumping in both feet and giving them everything that I have and that they might need to get better. And I train my colleagues. I train psychologists now. I train them to do the same. Like, there's nothing wrong with terminating therapy and suggesting that somebody seek a resource that is more in line with what their goals might be. But my goals, if I'm working with someone with a substance use disorder, is to get them better. Not half better, not partially, but to get them to a space where their life is no longer being negatively impacted by these substances. And there's pathways to do that. And I think you know that, having, again, been working in the area before. And so that's the space I want to share with a patient is let's get you to where you're happy again, where your life, you have your, and I've watched, that's why I've probably done this work for as long as I have, the degree of joy that you get to see on someone's face, usually in short term order too. Like, it doesn't take long. People from major addiction can be quite healthy within 3 to 6 months. That's fun to watch. That is, as a clinician, I got to tell you, there's nothing that makes my life better than to watch somebody get that and see what happens in their world.
So the ones that don't work out for you, and you quote unquote you fire your clients, do you ever send them to a colleague? Say, hey, like,
Only if they're matched clinically, but most of my sort of close collegial relationships, we all have the same sort of philosophical beliefs about how to treat this disorder. I don't think any of us are harm reduction. Now, having said that, we believe in medically assisted recovery, meaning that use of substances for the short term to manage a withdrawal process and get somebody to a space where they are off the substance that was driving their addiction. Most of us support that, but we don't support the harm reduction measures of handing out the substances and or everything else to use them. My statement to most people is when we do that, all we're doing is walking someone to the same place, just slower, but it's to their death. It's eventually they are going to pay the ultimate price, not me, but them. Well, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to do that to somebody. I don't want to say, yeah, this will work out for you, let's do it this way, knowing full well that the results are 95% of the time disastrous.
we so in Hawaii, when we were in the Hope Center, we've had some working relationships with other centers, right? So if we had to expel someone from the program, there was a time where we basically just, here, pack your bags and you're out the door. And I felt really convicted about that, right? And so had to find a way, how can we best serve them even though they don't work out here? And it got to a place where I had a working relationship with two other places. And it also got to a point where they kind of already knew if I ever called a colleague, and they already knew, all right, who do you got? you know, what do you have for me? And but I will say, if we ever had to get rid of somebody, as I matured in that area, is how can I best serve them, even though they can't stay here, right? And I want to put this comment up by Sarah. She typed up a huge paragraph. There are so many people that have issues with addiction, but may never gotten to the point where they are dabbled with hard drugs. I remember when energy drinks came out and people were abusing them, and while not illegal, they can still have the similar addictive properties. And people were using them in the name of productivity and would go through withdrawal when they tried to stop.
Yeah, when I say we, as human beings, we have the ability to habituate and habituate problematically to a whole bunch of things when it's not a chemical area. Usually we call them process addictions. So they have behavioral manifestations typically to them. Probably the worst of all of those is gambling, and in part because it was intentionally designed using the best operant change protocols available, to ensure that the behavior didn't extinguish in any event. That's going way off sideways. But yeah, people in general have the ability to create a habituated pattern to things that aren't necessarily beneficial or good for them. And depending on what it is, then you're right, they might experience a physiological withdrawal from that. So like caffeine, of course, is addicted. Take somebody who drinks a lot of coffee and tell them not to drink any, they're going to have a few days of headaches and
lies. That's all lies. I'm telling you, lies.
I want to talk about one of Heath's comments too, which speaks to this, and that is that people believe that if something was legal, then it's free of adverse effects, and that is just not true. That was part of the belief up here in Canada that people were saying once it was legalized is, well, it's safe. I mean, the government's legalized it, so it's not harmful, and or saying, well, it's not nearly as harmful as alcohol. And the reality, they're both harmful, just in different ways. But they both have meaningful levels of harm to them. So
I will exclude Red Bull and fresh brewed coffee from that list of what you talked about. I will exclude those two things from that list.
I was going to say, you've seen me pick out, if I had to eliminate coffee. In fact, my wife would be the one who would say it. Well, I'll get up sometimes at 2 a.m. and go get a cup of coffee, and then I'll go back to bed.
I am not a doctor, but you officially have a problem, Dr. John. I just want to let you know that if you're getting up at 2 a.m. and you're grinding
to have coffee, I'm getting up because of my age, probably to use a restroom.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Then I think, well, coffee would be nice. Like, just it smells nice. It's warm, especially if it's a cold night here. See, it's cold here in Canada. I should have that as an excuse that I need to warm up.
You might have to check yourself in and hire Dr. Heath for some services. Here's a question, and I won't put on my ministry hat just yet, but why do you think, in general, why are we so addicted to, whether it's a substance or everything we talked about? Why is that? Why are we so addictive in nature as human beings?
See, and this is where I would say you could put your ministry hat on, because
I'm going to trust me, but I'll let you go first.
I think part of it is a spiritual void. When we have that void, we look to fill it with something, and substances make us feel good. They're temporary, but they do make us feel good, and so people have, for again, the long term, done that, reached out as a way to fill that void. And so, I mean, there are clearly other factors that go into substance use disorders. But to me, again, if you're going to be an expert in this area, you better understand the biopsychosocial and spiritual factors that contribute to not only how this disorder develops, but how you treat it. Because if you don't treat all the silos that contributed to that disorder developing, you're going to leave someone in a position of relapse. That person is still going to have that void. It would be akin to treating somebody for a substance use disorder and ignoring their maybe their co-occurrent major depressive disorder and thinking they're just going to be okay. Well, no, they're not. The major depressive disorder is going to lead back to using substances and that cycle. And similarly, if you ignore the spiritual silo, you're going to do the same thing.
Like I reiterate, I am not a doctor. From a ministry perspective, I do believe that there is one silo, if not addressed properly, it doesn't matter how many silos you address, you will continue to fail. And that's a spiritual one. And I'm not taking away from obviously what you do as what you do, but I do believe that because there is such a heaviness, a spiritual heaviness. And we don't talk about this enough as clinicians, as pastors, that the spiritual heaviness of someone that is addicted to a substance, the substance is not necessarily the issue in itself. It is the fact that you talked about, you said there's a void that we need to fill and it feels good, but only for a season.
Yep.
And left unaddressed, and I don't have all the clinical terminology, but what I do know is that if there's an addictive nature or something that happened that you have not dealt with in the spiritual realm, there's a backdoor or a legal right that the enemy has, Satan, for those that are in the Christian space, he has a legal right to continue to torment you spiritually in that respect. We can call it temptation. We can call it addictive, codependencies. We can call it all different languages. But in the spiritual side of it, if we don't take away that legal right that he has to continue to pester us and harass us in the spiritual aspect of it, that's where a lot of that struggle comes from.
And it's not just, as you would well know too, substances, because that's where sex addiction lives. That's where gambling lives. That's where shopping addiction lives. That's like the space that is filled by is detrimental, is what it is. It's just, what is it that's going to position itself there? And again, similar to what you just said, unless that's addressed, it will just continue to stay there. It's not going to kick itself out.
I was going to save this question for the end, but what do you mean when you say that you're designed by God to be in this profession? I know you mentioned that to me earlier in our conversation. What do you mean by that when you say you're designed by God to be in this profession?
And I won't go into details on there have been significant numbers of events that have occurred in and around my world that clearly have indicated to me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and from a spiritual perspective, doing that this is where God has wanted me or placed me or blessed me to be in, because it has been a blessing. I mean, it's hard work sometimes, but it's been a very blessed career. If I go to one example and again, I don't know, people can believe whatever they want to believe, but when I finished doing my provisional hours, which are the hours you do when you're supervised to become a psychologist, I did those hours doing child abuse assessment and perpetrator assessment, which, as you can probably appreciate, is not pleasant work. It was exceedingly difficult. And I thought, at the end of that, I would say I was burnt out. Back then, that was the other thing. Back then, mental health workers didn't pay near the attention we do now, which I'm glad we do, to our own mental health. It was just sort of, you do this work, so suck it up. I mean, you should be okay doing it. Doing 500 child abuse and perpetrators assessments, especially at the age, I was really young. I was too young probably to do that job, but I was ready to quit in its entire. So I'd finished 7 years of schooling. done all my internship and my provisional hours, and was done. Like, I thought, this is it. Like, I'm finished. I said, so which I go to is, I prayed and said, like, you know me, God, you know that I need sort of concrete stuff, the abstract examples or some sort of abstract messaging isn't going to attentively inform me that I should stay doing this. So I need something that will tell me that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And so, lo and behold, because I had just finished all my hours, written all my exams to become registered, and you get a registration number as a psychologist. And my number, which was 1981, which might seem like no big deal, but the year that, excuse me, need a drink of water, talking too much. Hold on. The year that I also was blessed, which I don't know if you know this, but gained my own recovery in addiction, was 1981.
I didn't know that. I was going to approach that at some point, but
yeah. And I thought, okay, like, I could have been 1982. I could have been 1980. I could have been 1980, like, whatever. There's always about 200 of us that register and get our certificates at the same time. And so, lo and behold, my registration number for the whole of my career was, and that's not the only, there have been numerous other things that have happened, but the one I'm willing to share was that one that was very meaningful to me. I went, okay, I asked for concrete. I didn't want abstract. That was concrete to me, that said, you're where you need to be.
Well, I will say this, Dr. John. I know that obviously you were designed. That, to me, that's a given. But I also know that you were called. And I also know, on top of the being called, I know that you were chosen. And that's just something I feel in my spirit, like just what we're talking about, that you weren't just designed and just called, but you were chosen to be in a space that heavily needs someone that not only been through that, but got the expertise to approach it from a clinical level on top of a spiritual level. And I think that speaks volumes upon, we don't even have to go into detail on how or why you got to this chapter of your life, but I do know that this is not a mistake for us to be here today. That's obviously, that's a given. This is no, like, hey, I just wanted to talk. No, like, this is an ordained moment. Like, this is supposed to happen today on this conversation. And, I never went through anything in the area of drug addiction. My wife has, before we met. I'm not even going to use the terminology, but what's your drug of choice? That's what we would say on an intake. But her battle was with crystal meth, and I never had that. But I always tell her, just because my vices were not detrimental in physical health, much so the things that I dealt with, obviously very heavy in the spiritual realm too. Thank God it didn't go into the physical. But I just, before we move on, I just want to say, man, I appreciate you, man, sharing that, because we need more people that are not just designed, but they have the expertise to attack it from a very, very, for lack of a better word, with wisdom and with tact, and doing it in love, right? Not just turning people away. So,
and when I started down this path, part of why I did all the education I did is, like, I watched, and it's still true today, there's lots of people that work in recovery that their credential to do that is their own recovery, that they were able to find a space of sobriety and recovery in their own world, and then went into this field to impart that and help others that to get there. And I wanted people, in fact, which is why I don't always inform everyone that I have my own recovery background, is because I wanted people to know that this was also a qualified, like there was more than just my personal opinion on this.
Mhm.
Like I went and did the schooling and looked at the research and did my own research. My PhD and my dissertation were both in the field of substance use disorders. My PhD in the area of alcoholism, personality, and spirituality features. And so I wanted to make sure that when I was giving someone direction, they weren't just looking at me and maybe going, well, that's just what worked for you, or that's just
Mhm.
your own personal. I wanted to be able to back it up too with, no, this is what research also says. It may have worked for me, but there's also research that sits behind all of this stuff that says, here's a pathway that will get you to where you need to be. And so I didn't want to rely solely on my own background. So
So you got the cookie with 12 chocolate chips, is what you're telling us.
I had really good mentors. I had really wonderful people. I mean, again, I look back at my life and was blessed in so many ways, that I didn't even know at the time. But age gives you some ability to to look at this in larger and smaller pictures both. And I had some really wonderful people. Like, anyone who gets to a space of having this level of education or experience didn't get there by themselves. The people help somebody. And I had my wife included. I wouldn't have my PhD without. She was my main motivator to not only pursue but finish my PhD. Yeah, that's a story for another probably time. It went so sideways that it was a horror show. Um,
So
and
you've been going at it for 30 plus years, right? Is what you
yeah,
were telling me.
yeah.
So you got your PhD when you were what, 19?
No, see, I didn't. I in Alberta, one of the benefits of working in this province too is that you can get registered as a psychologist with a master's degree. You don't have to have the PhD.
Mhm.
So I had my master's and worked at that level for, I think, about 15 years before I went. So I went back to school in my mid 30s to do my PhD. And what should have taken about 2.5, maybe 3 years, if I had been sort of slacking on it, ended up taking me just over 10 years because of a whole bunch of mistakes. And again, I look at that experience and while I was in it was going, God, why am I even here? And part of what I learned, and and it wasn't what somebody had said this, is sometimes life happens, and life happens on terms that have nothing to do with you, but it happens to you so you can benefit someone else. And so I
Mm.
learned by that state. I've had lots of things happen that I don't have any understanding for, but other people have been blessed by some of those experiences because I've been able to impart sort of my experience to their world. And so it really wasn't related to me. It was because God knew somewhere on my path this person was going to be there and needed whatever that information or that experience or that life message or learning would be. And so it really wasn't about me.
Well, that's just straight up facts. And I'll tell you this, I'm going to tell you what I told Dr. Heath. And I'm not going to ask you your age. I did make the mistake of asking Dr. Heath, but I'll tell you this.
I don't mind saying my age.
Oh, no. Well, I'll tell you
I'll wait for your question.
Well, here's what I'll say, and you can tell, tell me your age. I'm just going to tell you what I told him, is that you age well. And you don't age like cheese, but you age like fine wines. And so you do age well.
See, now if I were to say I'm 40, you'd go, "Oh my God, you're in rough shape, buddy." No, I'm coming up 60.
You age well, I will say.
I'm actually teaching for the first time ever. Like, I teach developmental psychology. When I picked up my syllabus and put it together last semester, I realized this is the first time that I'm teaching this class in the old age population group, and thought, well, I'm here.
So what is developmental psychology? Explain that for our viewers or listeners.
Oh, we look at psychological issues and psychological development across the whole of the lifespan. So most of developmental psychology, it's heavily weighted in from pregnancy through to early childhood to middle childhood, roughly. We also, though, do of course spend time on adolescence and early adulthood and middle and late adulthood, is how it's divided up. But we look at both the normative and the pathological aspects to development. And of course, the reason there's such a focus on the early years is that if the system gets broken early, it can be potentially broken through the lifespan. Like if we do damage to a child, that damage can potentially be their life script void of meaningful information and supports and help, and that's what, if you work in that area, God love the people that do that work. That is hard work. That is the work of, I had a colleague, the one that trained me in clinical psychodiagnostics. I'll never forget him, nor be grateful to him for his training, but he spent his whole career, which was over 40 years, treating children of abuse. That would have been hard work. Like that's work. That's doing the heavy lifting.
That hits home. I tell you that much. My oldest daughter, and I've shared this publicly, so it's not hard for me to talk about it. But what you just shared is such an important, valuable resource to families, because what we went through with our oldest daughter, there was a season in our life where we were told by physicians that we could not have our own children. And so we walk through those chapters and just had faith, believing that God will bless my wife's womb. In the middle of that, we fostered a child who was heavily abused. And to this day, like, we don't know all the details. We just know that there was some really evil things, to a child. At the time was 1.5. And we ended up getting her, ended up adopting her. She just graduated college in Boston and got married. And
I know which of your I've seen you.
Yeah, you've seen her. So
I didn't know she's great. That is so great.
It's a crazy story, and she's not perfect. None of our kids are, but she's been through some tough chapters. And some of those things we're finding now, it doesn't hinder her, but we do see some of those effects even till today.
Yeah. No, if 0 to 6 is critical, and if a child between the ages of 0 to 6 is abused, severely traumatized, or severely neglected, it's not, are there going to be impacts? It's how severe are those impacts going to be? There are going to be impacts from that. Children all need safety, security, and consistency. And if you can get them from 0 to 6 with those 3 intact, meaning that they haven't been abused, doesn't mean that I'm a parent, we all make mistakes, but if they weren't abused, severely traumatized, or neglected, they have a really high potential for good mental health. The next time frame, 7 to 14, is also meaningful if disrupted, but 0 to 6 is truly the critical time frame. And I'll tag on to your word, truly, it is evil, some of the things that people do to 0 to 6 year. I had my eyes opened. Again, I was way too young to have had that job, but hearing story from both children and perpetrators, some of which were clearly psychopathic, that were not only comfortable but prideful in their discussion of some of the things they did, were evil things to teeny human beings in the world. Like, it's just, it was bizarre to me that the human condition could get that dark, but it can.
If I were in your shoes, I would definitely be I'll be a Batman. I would have a night job. you know?
Well, let me share this, and I won't share all the details. That's
course.
actually why I stopped doing it. I went to do an assessment where I was as close to being a Batman. After reading the file, it was the most severe abuse I had seen in the 500 assessments, and was ready to potentially look to take that in my own hands. And I thought, okay, I'm done. Like, that informed me that I couldn't trust myself to maybe not do that the next time. Like, I was able to have impulse control and not do anything to the person. But the thought of it made me realize too, though, that even though this is a perpetrator sitting across from me, they still deserve my respect, my compassion, and my professionalism. And if I can't give that, or fully know that I can give that, it's time to, and that's why I went back to the office after that and told my supervisor, look, I'm done. I'll give you 2 weeks or a month or whatever you need, but let me just work with, because she had a counseling practice on top of the child work we did. I said, I'll just give me adults to see or something, but I don't want to do another assessment.
Well, my wife just punched an imaginary perpetrator. She just went, so, you know, there was a movie that I talked about it with my last guest. I think it was a movie with Jennifer Lopez where she was, I want to say she was a psychologist, but she went into the mind of a serial killer. Can you look that up, hon?
Yeah, did we do this?
Yeah, we did this before. But my wife is so engaged in our conversation. She said, I would give him lickings. Jasmine's purpose. That's what we say in Hawaii. And I'll share this part because, and I think it's okay to share this. One of the things that we found out before we fostered her was that one of her siblings, who probably had addiction issues as well, she's a product of a mother who was using crystal meth. So I think she was 1.5, and her sibling had put her in a corner of this garage with a pit bull that the chain was just long enough to where it would be right to where it wouldn't bite her. But if she had gotten close, and so she had a fear of dogs. And we had to go through some serious therapy, and even to the point where we ended up buying a puppy for her, and she was terrified of it, but kind of loved it at the same time. Just so many things came with the hair. I read one of the, I think the DSM-5 with the hair pulling, the skin picking. She had all that
Excoriation and
trichotillomania.
Pulling.
She had all that. And we had to walk her through that. It was crazy. And I'm going back and reading. I was doing some research on what we were talking about. Man, I remember, and she was pulling up patches. Patches of hair.
I had students who have come to me and they disclosed to me, which again, I feel blessed when they do. Like, I don't know why there've been more than one, and it's a rare disorder. And so surprising that I had more who were wearing wigs, because they had pulled all their hair out, and they're college age. Did you ever see the movie? I see Dr. Heath has The Cell, which I don't know what that, but the Prince of Tide.
Prince of Tide, yes, I've seen that.
The scene in there, I actually show it to my students that when I talk about treating trauma, the way that what's the actor's name? It's not coming to me all of a sudden.
Can you look that up too, honey? My wife look it up.
Nick Nolte, is that? No, maybe.
I always confuse Nick Nolte and the other guy, Gary Busey.
I think it's Nick Nolte.
Nick
Anyway,
Nolte.
the scene where he discloses the abuse is what someone did their research, because that's what happens to a patient. Their eyes glaze over, and you can see them transitioning into that space. Like they're not there anymore. They're not in your room. Their mind's eye is all attached back to that event. And it's like, I show students that in part to say, if you ever have a patient do this, know that you're going to need to put them back together. They are currently exceedingly sort of dysregulated. They're now in a trauma. They're not in your room. They're and you have to put them together before you let them leave your office.
You got a bunch of Legos on the floor if you're not careful.
So
I want to read this because she spent, and we'll, Dr. Heath, thank you for the reference. The movie was a sell. And Sarah says, we have a teenager, stepdaughter. Just keep praying that God gives me the wisdom on how to get through these valuable and important years of her life. I find the high school and the college years are so influential in the path they choose going forward.
See, I would say they are and they aren't, in so much that I'd say I believe, as the Bible says, raise them upright, and they'll come back. They'll re-exist in the world they were raised up in. And so even though they may depart from it, especially when influenced by peer systems, I believe they'll return backwards. So
I do agree. I will add to what she said. I think stepdaughter, with us having we adopted our first, she is bloodline to my wife, but just not ours biologically. We had to make that declaration when we adopted. From this day forward, all that genealogy, all the genetics, and we understand the medical. We don't deny the medical and all the expertise, but from a kingdom, God perspective, from a spiritual perspective, she's mine. She's my daughter. She's my wife's daughter. She's our firstborn. We made that declaration. So everything moving forward, whatever accusation that the enemy may have had in the spiritual side of it, the spiritual silo, no more. Now, we still got to do the other 4 or 5 silos, right, Dr. John? So,
see, we did the same with my family. We're a blended family. I never referred to my kids as stepkids.
Yeah, amen.
And they don't refer to me as their stepdad. We have always just been a family of connection and choice. But I'm their dad, and they're my son and daughter. We didn't differentiate. I believed differentiating that is problematic and potentially damaging. It suggests separation sometimes, and we didn't want that. We had a whole number of different sort of features going into our marriage, which made it where it is today, which is just past 24 years that I'm blessed with a wonderful woman. So
the Brady Bunch. Yeah.
No, I didn't have. I didn't have any coming in.
Okay, so let me read this. Knowing when to discipline and when to let things slide, and try to encourage her, but still let her make her own decisions. I will say what you said about train up a child, in the way that I think one of the translations is in the way that they should go, or another one is in the way that they are bent, or in the way that they are created, right? So I think we all can agree that not every child has the same love languages or has the same dispositions, and we love. I always tell my kids, like, I don't love you more than this one, but I love you different. It's not a matter of it's not like a currency. It's I have to love you because one of my kids, you can hug him all day long and just kiss him on the neck and he could care less. I mean, he'll care, but it doesn't move him. But the minute you encourage him and say, son, you are so amazing, you're awesome, and he is in love,
right?
And of course, spending time with him is another one. And with our kids, I agree with you that you put in enough bumpers. If for anybody that's ever played bumper bowling. Put enough bumpers on there, and they may go out of the lane for a little bit, but they know where the lane is.
Yep.
And give them that choice.
Well, and let them make a few bad decisions. Sometimes isn't a bad thing, as long as it doesn't cost them their life. There's still the opportunity to bounce back around. I saw that Eva has joined our chat as someone else from Periscope. I don't know if you remember Eva.
I know a few Evas. I'm not sure if that's the same one. I have one Eva who is in Europe somewhere, so I'm not sure if that's the same one.
This is a U.S. United States Eva.
Well, thank you for coming back. Appreciate you, Eva. And then Sarah came in, and well, Dr. John, we're doing a Q&A while we're live. Are you okay with that? That's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I like Dr. Heath's comment. There are no such thing as stepchildren. They're just children. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
You if you have them in your life, they're and you're the person responsible and responsive to be playing a role in that, then they're your child.
Sarah said that preteen, she wasn't comfortable calling her mom, and that's fine. We're not going to offer any parental advice, but I just say, man, as long as your kids know that you love them, through it all. I mean, they can call you whatever. I can tell you this much, Sarah. I promise you this. I'm not going to guarantee, but I can promise you this. I can almost. Okay, I won't guarantee. I'll say, I know she wants to call you mom, because if you love her the way that I know you, you're more of a mom to her than whatever happened to her in a previous situation with her life.
So it's like my daughter. She actually rarely uses the term dad. She calls me Mr. John or MJ because that she's from the South originally, and so that's common language in the South is to address adults as Mr. and their first name, and that it just stuck for her. And she where's my son does call me dad. She just has always called me Mr. John or MJ.
So just to clarify, these comments I'm not Mimi, but my wife is commenting on my comment. So our adopted daughter would call her Mimi for a very long time, because that was the name that our nephews and nieces would call her. So she would associate Mimi until one day the I's turned into an O. So from Mimi to mom. And so there's a progression, through that. And that's okay. To me, that's fine.
Yep.
Like, as long as there's respect in that, I think that for some kids, that's their bridge word. That's how they connect to what they really are feeling in their heart. Because no matter what comes out of their mouth, I know in their heart, at some point, that abundance, and I'm going to start preaching, but that abundance that's in the heart, at some point, their mouth will speak.
Yep.
I believe that. And I know that scriptures, I'm not trying to take it out of context, but I do believe that as well, that out of the abundance, what's in their heart and what we put in them as children, at some point it's going to come out in their language and how they speak. I firmly believe that. Congratulations, Sarah. They're married 3 years next week.
Cool.
That's a milestone. Can we talk about, I wrote it down, but are you okay on break time, or how you doing on break? You need to take a break or anything before we...
Maybe like a minute if you want to play.
Okay. This is the fun part.
Run through one of your ads, or whichever, more just to get up, stretch, move around a little bit. Hopefully people can wait one minute while we do that and stay present with us. It'd be nice to keep you here.
So family, we're going to take a short break. We're going to refill our drinks, our beverages, clear our sinuses, take a quick stretch. We're going to be here for a little bit. We'll be back in a minute or two, and I would encourage you to do the same. Kind of stretch. Don't just sit there and stare at your phone or your computer the entire time. Get a little bit of fresh air. We'll be back in about a minute. Sarah said it's hard being a viewer on the East Coast.
Yeah, I was just typing in a response to that.
That's what you get for living in Canada, Sarah. I'm just kidding. You know, I met her in Hawaii. Her and her mother, and they came to. We had a musical event where my friend Larry was hosting, and I was so blessed to meet her and her mom. So
Did you see Dr. Heath's comment about your foreign language?
he's such a troll, man. And you know what? I'm going to keep it light for a second, but he thinks he can flex because he's got his protein drinks and he's got the big muscles and then he's got his psychology degrees and whatever, Dr. Heath. You know what I have? I have a school of hard knocks. I'm building my MBA, so don't worry, bro. I get them. In all seriousness, my wife is actually working on her master's degree in business, so we know that going that second chapter of life. My wife is a champion. She's been on the dean's list for 98%, I think, of her college career.
I was going to say, very impressive, especially overcoming the addiction she did. There isn't a high success rate for that. That one is not easy, and so I'm sure, knowing what I do about you, and I've heard her in the background on different broadcasts, that I'm sure she credits most, if not all of it, to God, but at the same time, she had to walk in that pathway to get there. So,
you know, it's so I don't know the word, textbook cliche to say stuff like, as a married couple, we've been together 25 years, and it's for her to walk through seasons in our marriage where not feeling that she was good enough. To me, that's textbook and easy to say. I don't mean it easy for her, but because of the things she's been through. But I have the same things. Like I have the same feelings of not being good enough for her as a man. You know, I walked through those things, and it's not because of things that were public, or it's because I know who I am. I know the chapters that I've written in my life that are not desirable. And so,
isn't marriage a one, like, I watch the current generation in this more of a hookup culture, and where marriage is passe, and I think I won't get into. I think I believe part of why that's pushed, but nonetheless, they're missing out on so, like, there is something about a 20-year, 25-year, or like, there's just something about that I think people are going to miss if they stay in this mindset of short-term relationships or hookups, or not following that historical sort of pathway that was there culturally for a long time, and for good reason. As a social species, it's good to have connection. But anyways,
do you do a lot of work in the area of what we're talking about, like relationships and couples?
I did probably 20 years of my career was spent doing lots of couples work, and I had I don't know, formulas. I had a protocol that I would typically follow with couples in order to get their marriages either back on track or functional again. And again, similar to addiction, it was so much fun to watch couples that engaged that process and did the work, be coming in where on session one, they were sitting either on the opposite side of the room or as far away from each other as they could be, to coming in and they're snuggling again, and they're holding hands, and they're engaging each other clearly in a way that is showing their new or reconnection. And that's just, I mean, there's something about watching that I felt blessed in that, to be part of being in that room and sharing space with their world.
So how did you, and I'm talking from experience, by the way, how did you get, or how did you get the man to disarm when he sat in a room with you and his spouse?
First and foremost, and I was on one of Dr. Heath's recent broadcasts actually, and brought this up of how psychology has actually feminized a lot of language in therapy, which I think is detrimental, especially in couples work. The word that I have heard from many male clients that will have them run for the door is, "What is your love language?" Um, I mean, you ask many males that question, and they're actually they shut down. Like they're not going to engage at that point. They feel like they're outnumbered. They feel like it's going to be 2 against 1 is going to be the way this game is going to unfold on them. And so in part, my work with people kept a very neutral language system to make sure that I wasn't excluding either side, but that the process was going to involve and require involvement from both people for it to get to a healthier space.
So rather than love language, would you say, "Hey, Greg, what is your engine size? Is it a V8? Is it a four-wheel drive? Are you a Ferrari guy? Like, how would you? What kind of language would you use other than love language, for example?"
Well, typically I don't draw those kinds of sort of comparative features anyway. Like I when I talk with couples, part of the work that I do with them, if I had an analogy to anything, it's building a house, and that house has got to be built on a strong foundation. My recommendation to most people, even though they may not choose to do it, is that foundation needs to be God, and you build up from there. Walls and beams are part of the communication and conflict resolution structure. Being able to meet each other's needs and do that in a healthy and productive way are the cabinetry. All of them are required in the house, but you better have a foundation, because if you put all of that other stuff, and it can be built really well, but if you put it up on sand, it's coming down again.
Mm-hmm. As a pastor and someone that counsels people, I never would counsel the opposite sex by myself. First of all, now with my wife, that's another thing, and that rarely happens anyway. Like for you, have you ever had? Obviously, just in general, I'm speaking in general, but the husband or the man will always be a little bit on the outside. But have you ever had a couple where the both of them are kind of like feeling that you weren't listening to them, or you weren't, with their best interest at heart? You ever had that happen where they just, "What are you doing, doctor?"
Oh, I'm sure I did. Again, my belief, as you read in my bio, is to give people the best professional recommendations possible to get them to a healthier space from what space they're reporting they're in. And sometimes, well, I know not just people didn't like those recommendations.
Yeah.
They weren't pleased with what I would be suggesting. And again, I didn't see my job as ever just accommodating their desired need. Like, let me give you an example. I had one person come in who said, "I just need stress management. I've done my own homework. We don't need to sit here and look at a whole bunch. I need to do stress management and life will be good again." And I said, "Okay, well, usually I do an assessment first and we'll go from there." And he said, "No, again, like I don't want to, we have an hour and I don't want to waste much time here. So can we just, do you work in that area?" I said, "Yeah, I work in stress management, do lots of work in the area. But how about afford me the opportunity to do some part of my assessment so I know what's going on for you before we get into. I said, I promise you this: before you leave today, I will give you at least one stress management tool to be able to manage whatever currently happening. He said, okay, I'll do this then. Well, the third sort of area that I ask in my assessment is family. And what I came to find out was this person was having an affair with his wife's best friend, and the four of them were scheduled to go on vacation in 2 weeks. I said, I got to tell you, all the stress management in the world isn't going to fix that. Like, you're going to need a lot more than stress management to get past that level of concern in your world. Which again, I think he thought if he just got a little stress management work, he'd be able to get through what was going to be, and eventually was, a horror show when it all started to unfold.
Well, there's two things I thought when you were speaking. Is one, he probably could use a lawyer at some point if he didn't correct his actions. The other, have you ever had someone where they refused, like, to allow you to do your job from the very beginning, and you just had to say, you know what, I don't think this is a good fit? Have you ever got to a place where you couldn't even work with somebody from the first meeting?
Actually, when you say that, the first thing that I had someone I assessed. It was a couple that came in to see me, and so I was doing the assessment. I actually had met with them both, and they were then coming together. So I met with each individually to get a full picture of each background before meeting with them together, and then I brought them together to do a summation of their assessments and my recommendations. And as I was reading my recommendations, I heard blah 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 blah. And I looked up, and the mail it came from him. So I set my notepad down on the desk that was in front of me and said, well, clearly we're finished here. I said, with that type of response, the reality is you need a different therapist, and having made the statement, know that I'm not going to back up on that at this point. Like, I am going to give you a referral. I have done an assessment and have a set of recommendations here for you. But I am going to suggest you see someone else, because that display and lack of sort of respect that you just showed there isn't going to bode well for us to be able to move forward. And I remembered them because I'll never forget. We had this long hallway leaving our office space so that people didn't run into each other coming in and out, so that there could be the confidentiality. And I could hear the wife all the way down the hallway. How do you get thrown out of therapy? What psychologist? What do you have to do for a psychologist to get thrown out? And was mad at him. Like, she was hot. She couldn't understand why he did what she did to get tossed from therapy.
You're very gracious, because I can imagine someone that's not as professional, as they're walking down the hallway when blah 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 blah.
Yeah, no, I don't think I needed to light any other fire under
Yeah.
life. She was pretty mad that, because I think in part because I came highly recommend. She really wanted to get in to see me and get therapy with me, and got the opportunity for it, and then got tossed.
Now, obviously, professionally, it wouldn't or shouldn't affect you, but something like that happens to you, did it affect you, like, in a way, like in a negative way, like, oh, this, by the way of offense, for example? Did you ever?
No, it just informed me more of sort of who he was, and that, again, there would be no way that we could have the level of rapport that we would need to be able to do therapy, which is like, if I thought we could still proceed forward, I would have addressed it, but still kept them. But I knew that, again, the way he said it is like, all of it was a package of, I just disrespect you fully. And so I knew that there was no way we could proceed.
And did you still charge him for that session?
Oh yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're all professors here, but if he still had taken them on as clients, that would have been a cash cow because it would have taken him a while to.
Yes, yeah, that was the other though. I didn't ever want long-term clients. I have really good treatment protocol training from some really good clinicians, again, that I'm forever grateful for the different supervisors and people that trained me. And part of the work that I do with almost everyone has some psychoed parts to it and self-help features or components because I want people to get to a space where they don't need to come see me. I don't want to see you for I want to assist the space that you're in at that moment. But the next time something happens, if I've done my job well, you won't need to come back and see me. You'll have the tools to be able to do that work without accessing another psychologist. And so that was my goal, is to get people to that space. And generally not it shouldn't take a long time. We actually ran statistics. I always found this interesting. I worked with a large multinational company and was the director, and ran the differential statistics between the hours that our staff charged client files and hours that the private clinicians charged. They were each given the same number of hours of access to that patient. And my clinicians, because they were already being paid, so their income wasn't based upon how much or how often, were 4.5 hours differential from private practitioners, which was meaningful because that tells me that they're treating the same, because we looked across diagnostic populations. Well, it should have been equal if people weren't doing it for their own financial benefit, which said a lot to me that private practitioners need to develop some better ethics, that this isn't about you making money. This is about you treating someone. And if someone can do it 4.5 hours less time than you are almost consistently, you're probably in the wrong field.
Well, I'm thinking maybe they just had a few of those blah 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 clients, and they need work, and they just, but I Dr. Heath brought up something the last time I talked to him about the diagnoses from when he first started practicing to where it is today, and it's a lot more now, right, than what it was when he first started. And you're talking about around 4 hours less, right, on average, and is this list growing? Are we going to see a DSM-6?
There will be a 6. I'm sure of it. I don't know if it will grow much more. The other thing is sometimes they take things out. They do that as well. The what happens between editions is people are doing research in the background on all of these disorders to see whether or not there's any changes either in treatment approaches or onset or course or anything like that. And so sometimes disorders are actually removed, and new ones sometimes put in or moved to different areas. Like post-traumatic stress disorder might not seem like a big deal. It used to be part of the anxiety disorder categorization and was moved to its own area. Well, what that did was it created more funding for the overall research because it wasn't just one of the anxiety disorders anymore. It was in its own stress and trauma area, and ended up then having more financial resourcing. So there are a whole bunch of things that sort of go on in the background. But yes, I do believe we'll probably have a DSM-6. And again, the use of those labels, one needs to be cautious with. I was just talking to a provisional psychologist the other day about being careful in their file management and record keeping, and where they might not put diagnostics, because these are their files are legal documents, and if they're ever subpoenaed, you best be careful about what's in them, because it could end up being quite damaging either to that person or somebody else. And so we want to be cautious about that, which actually makes me think of a really aligned but off point, which is, did you watch the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial?
I loved it. It was so fun to watch.
It became one of my, again, side passions for a period. It was to catch that trial whenever I could in between classes. And the Curry was her name. Dr. Curry
Yeah.
was the psychologist called as the expert for Johnny Depp's side. I suspect every school of assessment and psychopathology and potentially forensics will play her testimony as the example of how to do this and how to communicate it back out to the public. She was outstanding. Like, if people haven't seen that and you have an interest in psychology, go to the part of the trial where Dr. Curry is on the stand describing the clinical assessment process.
Is that the blonde
Yeah.
lady? Yeah. Oh, she was fire. Oh, she was on fire. I remember that. And I know she's a professional, but she had such a confidence when she was speaking.
Yeah,
Like,
no, she's
yeah.
qualified to be doing what she's doing, and she does it well. She knows exactly what she's doing and how to do it. I was so impressed.
And I know it's so irrelevant, but it helped that she was an attractive person, because the way the media paints a picture is Amber Heard had the not so stellar side, and Johnny Depp has all the superstar, rock star. He has this whole. But I really felt bad for Amber Heard in the area of her team. It just really felt. It didn't feel like she had a good team on her side.
No, she didn't. I mean, I recall, if I'm correct, her the psychologist that was on Amber Heard's side of the courtroom, I believe, made the statement. I might be wrong, but I believe made the statement that there was a diagnosis made before she saw Amber Heard, which is hugely problematic.
Yeah.
And at that point, the questioning went horribly sideways for them.
We'll come back to, because that was a great trial, and I agree with you. Curry, right, was her name. Yeah. But there's some comments. I want to read this real quick with Sarah. She said that some people are so quick to say that they have anxiety as if they are self-diagnosing. Actually, we did talk about that briefly in the beginning. And can we go to the PTSD labels? Because I feel like, and I'll have my wife type it in the comments, her comment, but there's a lot, and I hear it a lot on Twitter, X Spaces, where there's a lot of people putting on that jacket or that label of PTSD. And I'm not judging anybody, but I do feel like it's being used a lot.
Oh, it's hugely overused because, again, people are applying it to things that it's not applicable to. As an example, my relationship broke up, so now I have PTSD. Well, you by definition, you cannot get PTSD from a relationship breakup, or from a job, being terminated from a job, or from a multitude of the different traumas we all face as part of life. The caveat is that there has to be either a real or perceived level of harm, up to including fatality, to be diagnosed with PTSD. And so if that's not present, but you're right, people throw it out all the time. I have PTSD because X trauma happened in my life. Well, no, you experienced a trauma, and you might have some of the features of post-traumatic stress, but no one qualified would diagnose you with post-traumatic stress disorder.
So does there have to be, let me rephrase that, if there's an absence of a fatality or near fatality, would it not be considered PTSD?
Right. If there is not a severity of either real or perceived, so even perceived,
Okay.
Physicality of severe harm or fatality is one of the key criterion for that disorder. And so many people, as you said, they just throw it out there as common language that they have post-traumatic stress disorder because of X, whatever X might be. And again, it's Did you see Dr. Heath's
I'm gonna put his up. Oh, there we go. So
That's hilarious.
So that's why Dr. Heath has been with his wife for 41 years this year. We know the secret. We go see Dr. John first, and then that's the spice of life right there.
Yeah.
This is my wife, by the way, not me, but she says that her dad had PTSD. He would wake up in the middle of the night, reliving the Vietnam War he was in. He would crawl on the floor holding a gun, imaginary, in his hand, and if you were in his way, he would yell at you, "Get down, get down."
Let me ask this, because it is your wife, so I can get feedback. Did he have a alcohol use disorder at all, or no?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, then that might be part of DTs. We used to see people, especially vets, when they'd go into withdrawal, have full and lived out, meaning that they felt that they were in the on the battlefield again, and would live out that action in the treatment center. They'd be crawling around and they'd be crawling over people's bunks, which you got to appreciate what someone else in withdrawal was.
Yeah.
They weren't real happy about that. But sometimes it's so it could be part, I mean, it could be both. It could be PTSD, but it could be DTs, whereby part of the DTs is potentially having those hallucinatory experiences that are exceedingly frightening, is part of the attachment to it.
I know he had a rough life prior to going into the military, but when he got out and I've never met him because he passed away before I met my wife, but there's so many stories circulating, Dr. John, about how tough of a guy he was, but going through all of that. I wish I'd met him because I would have total fun with him. Here's my wife. She says, yeah, it was real. His eyes were glassed over from the room to the bathroom. Then he'd get up and walk back to the room and go back to bed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's frightening when it happens for someone. So, and it is real. They are reliving that realm and that reality. And yeah,
I think that put a lot of, so my wife's upbringing, other than alcoholism and a ton of other things, that put a heavy stress on her life. She's the youngest, and just a lot of the things, even in our marriage, we walk through some of those things. Not necessarily her dad specifically, but things that happen because of those things in her household.
Well, there was also, I mean, there was different upbringing from when we look generationally. I mean, the generations that went to war, I mean, they have a very different. My dad was in World War II, and had a very different lens then on the world that newer generations may not fully appreciate. Like, as an example, we grew up in a nice home, and I mean, and if we were to complain, you can imagine the response wasn't well served by someone who spent time on the beaches of Normandy and
fighting for that.
and you're complaining that your dinner's not hot enough or so. Are you kidding me? Like, it parented from a very different perspective.
My dad didn't go to war. He couldn't because of his fingers. So my dad doesn't have fingers. They had the draft, but when he went to the office, they said, "Oh, we can't use you." But just that fabric of that generation too, from a family perspective, from a family dynamic, all it took was one physical correction from my dad to understand I would never disrespect my mom ever again. And yep. I'm glad I got it. I'm glad I got those physical corrections because I learned a value. There's a joke that I used to say that I suffer from a psychological condition from a child, and it's called respect for my elders. And you can thank my dad for that,
I grew up in a similar home, and my wife and I were actually talking about this recently. Both our dads could just look and it got changed. Like, people, they didn't oftentimes have to resort to anything other than the look that said, you're not doing what I want you to do right now. And kids responded quickly.
Well, I tell my kids, and I'm not a perfect parent. We're still learning. We have 4 kids here and a few that went up to be in heaven. I will say this, that all it takes is one time for them to understand that dad's not a liar and he does follow through. So I will respect the fact that my dad is a man of his word. So if I tell my kids this is a consequence and they know that I follow through, then they will always respect that. Or we hope in theory, right, as parents, that we hope in theory. But sometimes they'll push the buttons. They'll push the limit a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No, my daughter, if she hears this, will freak that I said it, but I'll say it because it's funny in relation to that. I told my daughter that if I ever caught her riding her bike again without her helmet, she would lose her bike for at least a week, if not longer. So I come home from work one day and my wife says to me, well, you made the statement, so you have to adhere to it. She was out riding her bike today without her helmet, so you have to go enforce that because you were the one who said it. So I go over to her and say to her, look, honey, I heard that you were riding around without your helmet today, so I'm taking your bike. And she said, well, actually, you said if you saw me riding my bike without my helmet,
oh, there we go.
you didn't see me. And I mean, this is a 6-year-old telling me you didn't see. And I actually credited her for that on semantics and good argument and said, you know what? You're right. I did not see you. Now, let me be clear. If I see you, if your mom sees you, if any human being in the world sees you without your helmet, and I hear about it in any way, shape, or form by voice, email, text, otherwise, you will lose your bike. Are we clear? She said, yep.
Well,
and never rode without her helmet again.
I'll add my input, but I want to read this. Thank you, Dr. Heath, for being here. We appreciate you, brother. He says, thanks for doing this. Brother says, much love to you both. We appreciate you. He has to go get his beauty sleep. Not that it's doing much good in that. Oh, you're beautiful. Dr. Heath is a beautiful man.
He is.
You know what I would have said, Dr. John? I would have said, I know what I said. Well, what the Bible says is that when a man leaves his mother and father and joins to be with his wife, he and the woman are one.
Yeah,
so therefore, I saw what you did.
Yeah, I went to the legality of it. She had a legal argument that was accurate.
She wasn't wrong.
No, gave her credit for that. So,
but I would also, if that were my daughter, I say, you know what? Let's read the Bible together. Come, let's go read the Bible. Let's go read for a minute. So,
I that's where I needed to have gone. Is you're right. Gone and said to her, let's go pick up. You pick up your Bible, I'll pick up mine, and we'll go from here. We'll figure out a way to resolve this where I win because I'm the parent.
I want to do a temperature check with you, Dr. John. Are you okay on time?
Actually, I was thinking we're getting close to 10 my time, and I'm happy to do if you get feedback from people that they want to see us connecting, or we can go just connect again whether we get feedback or not. I really enjoyed doing this, but I'm happy to reconnect, and I'm sure we have hours of stuff we can talk about. So,
well, let me tell you where this is headed. This is what I believe. My wife and I have been talking about it. We've been praying about organic location just for what we're doing right now. And I believe that God's going to open doors for us. So I know in the future, we're going to have a studio location where we'll just invite people to come in and we'll spend the day, whatever. So I know you and I, at some point, we're going to do this organically in person, whether it's here, we're closer to you. So I do know we'll have many more. And the other thing is,
which island are you on again?
Well,
are you on Maui or are you on one of the other islands?
Well, right now I'm on the biggest island.
I know you're in Oregon, but when you are on one of the...
So we have a property on the Big Island.
Oh, okay.
And one of the dreams is to eventually build something to where we can have like a ministry center, obviously a place to live and to maybe rent out. That's the dream and the plan. So that's probably obviously later down the road. So Big Island, But hey, if God tells us, Dr. John, hey, I want you guys to meet in Maui or Kauai, we do not want to disobey the Lord, brother.
No, no. One of
Yeah.
my wife's favorite places is Hawaii, and we haven't traveled since COVID stopped it, and then we've had other rationales for not going anywhere, but we are hoping to get back into traveling again here in the near future. And that is one of her favorite places in the whole world, is the magic that is God's Hawaii. So,
Well, there's a truth and a joke at the same time. This is what I believe, that when God had put the angel at the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and he told Adam and Eve, you shall not ever enter this place again. Well, I firmly believe that the angel kind of forgot about the back door of Eden, and that's where you find Hawaii. So I firmly believe that. I want to cover maybe one more topic, which is the psychotic disorders, and then we can kind of land the plane, and then we can do this again, or we can keep going. But in the area of psychotic disorders, have you done a lot of those in your practice?
I've assessed a number of people with schizophrenia, and had some that were patients because they had a co-occurrent substance use disorder. It's common for people, unfortunately, with schizophrenia to develop substance use disorders as a way to sort of put a squelch on what is the horror show of their mind. And so substances shut some of that down. But the problem is sooner or later, you can't just keep doing that without having problem from it. So I have done work in that area. I used to work with someone. We shared office space. She specialized in what was used to be called multiple personality disorder, is now called dissociative identity disorder. So I have some, probably more awareness of that disorder than some others, and it's a rare disorder, but it is an interesting disorder just because of what unfolds with it. So I guess that was the long answer to yes, I do have some experience with psychotic disorders.
Well, the multiple personality, it makes great television. I will say that. There's a TV show we watched, Psych. You ever heard of that TV show?
No.
It's not psychology, but it's spelled Psych.
Psychology.
Yeah. So the show's premise is that there's a guy who has photographic memory. He can see things, and because he's been doing it since a child, he puts things together and basically solves puzzle because of his ability to remember images and pick. Just he's phenomenal.
Okay. Did you ever see? Oh, sorry. Go on.
Well, he's crooked basically, so he took on a job as a police psychic. So, yeah, I know it's a little bit sideways from the question, but I'll recommend you to watch that show. I'll send you the link. But
did you ever see the United States of Terra? I think it was called.
I haven't.
I think that was what the premise was with her, is that she had multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, I mean, the one I was saying that because one of the episodes we watched was they thought there was only two, and then they later found out that there was a third, and the third came out during high stress moments to protect the female alter ego.
Yep.
And that's where the murders happened, because it's such a funny episode, but it was just very interesting that a male who was going through gender issues goes to psychologists to get therapy for dealing with that, and then the third personality comes out to defend, and right. that's where the story unfolds. So yeah, very interesting in the area of. Now the reason I was asking that is we would take in gentlemen that had they were under certain types of medications for psychotic reasons or whatever I can't remember the names of the medications.
Risperidol is one that's commonly used.
So one of the questions that our director would ask is, and he coached me on it, is ask them, were they on this medication before they got addicted to this drug or this? And so what we found, and not everybody, so anybody that's in recovery, and you've had me as a counselor, I'm not throwing you out there, but there have been a few where they would get disability benefits if they were continuing to see this physician or this doctor that would
Right.
prescribe them this medication. So that's one of the things I see in Hawaii. I'm going to put Hawaii on the map, and that is that there's a few people out there that are continuing to prescribe these medications to these individuals for whatever reason. But these guys are able to gamify the system basically to get money to support their habits and not really dealing with the issues at hand.
Yeah, I spend probably a quarter of my time now talking with, because my private company, we do work in psych disability management. And I was just talking to someone today, and we were sort of joking about the fact that 5% of the people that are on psych disability benefits take up 90% of our time because they're trying to gain the system somehow, whereas the vast majority that are on their benefits are looking to do whatever they need to get better, and they're motivated and they're engaged in the medical or psychotherapeutic process. But there's 5% out there that are just looking for, how do I stay disabled, get a whole bunch of money, and I'm not really disabled.
So from a corporate perspective, you're extremely valuable, I would guess, to maybe ascertain if someone is legitimate or still needing those types of services.
Yeah, that's part of the reason they send them to us, is first and foremost to assess whether or not they do actually have the disorder they're claiming to have, or that their physician may have diagnosed. But physicians are well known, unfortunately, to misdiagnose, and I'm not blaming them, because
Right.
they have 6 to 8 minutes with a patient who has set a requirement or an expectation that they walk out of that office with either a diagnosis, a prescription, but some form of an action. And so many are put in a place where they're misdiagnosing people. And so companies ask us first and foremost, do that. Determine whether or not there is a disorder. And then if there is, see, I'll only work with the companies, though, that will provide and pay for all of the treatment, regardless of number of sessions or anything else. We don't do the treatment, but I want to know that they're going to actually back their employee. So if we do find a disorder, we want to be able to make sure that that person gets the care they need. And so we won't work with companies that, what I call them, they're looking to get a hired gun. They just want somebody to identify the patients that might be problematic so they can fire them. They're not looking to help them. Oh, you're frozen on your side. I don't know if it's me or you. Maybe someone can type in the chat and I'll know if my screen is still moving, or are you still there, Sarah? Oh, it is Greg. Okay. I'll wait a minute to see if he return. He looks like he's fallen asleep.
I apologize.
There you
I'm
are.
not- That's the wonderful world of internet connections. So I caught you last at the companies willing to work with when you do work with their client or your client, and they're an employee. So that's where we last cut off.
Right. Some companies, what they do is what I call it's a hired gun. They hire people so that they can terminate it. I don't care. And I've had companies, I've probably walked away from more money in my field than I've actually made, because I've had people ask me to do things that I don't find ethically, they border on ethics probably. Someone could but I don't live in that space. And I've just said, no, sorry, go find someone else.
Yeah.
It's not what I do.
Have you ever felt that it puts your personal safety at jeopardy if like someone that loses benefits in that way because of what you find?
No, I guess not, or at least not yet. I've never sort of felt that. Now maybe I will, but
Well,
I never have.
it wasn't my intention, but um,
I I know where my protection comes, and I'm good. So
just catching up on comments. Thank you to and by the way, thank you to our people on YouTube, our listeners, our viewers, and also on Twitch, and also for those of you on Twitter/X. Our family on X, a lot of them don't know that you can comment. It's a little bit of a journey to comment on Twitter X. You just have to kind of swipe up on the screen, but thank you for that. The difference between schizophrenia and
affective disorder.
yes, affective.
Yeah, schizoaffective disorder is there are features of psychoticism and features that are sort of shared with schizophrenia, which is in part why it's called schizoaffective disorder. There's also schizotypal personality disorders, which is a personality disorder with delusional and psychosis type features. So there are a number of them but they are each different. There are different aspects to all of them, of that grouping, schizophrenia is probably the more common of them.
I had, I think this would be the last part of this part, is I had a few experiences with people that I don't even know the proper, I don't want to offend anybody in any way, but just doing so much drugs that it affected them in such a way that they ended up being diagnosed with one of these, schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder.
Yep.
And does that ever stop? Like, I understand once you're diagnosed, has it ever gotten to the point where it's so bad in the brain in terms of degenerative effects? Has it ever gotten so bad have you ever experienced anything like that?
What do you mean so bad?
So, so I used to work for a company where I would offer respite care for a child. His mom was always in and out of jail, and she just had a very bad habit with crystal meth, and it was so bad where it was unhealthy for him, the physical abuse and those kind of things. I never found out what happened. I just know that that situation never got better for him. The mom kept abusing to the point where, from what I remember, is that she didn't even look at him as her son anymore. And I always wonder, how bad did it get for him? Did she get to the point where she didn't recognize him? Is that even possible? Did she, look at him as an aggressor? I always wondered what happens in a situation like that. I don't know. I've never seen it, so I really don't know.
I would suspect that, again, not knowing, but the reality, unfortunately, is many of those kinds of situations just don't have good outcomes. More people will die from their substance use disorders than get treatment for them. Many people, part of it is they don't even know what's available. And so which in today's day and age is surprising, but it's true. There's many people that really just don't know what is available to help and support them. And so some of that is on our fault in not getting more communication out in the world. But then there are a number of people that just choose not to follow the for lack of a better term, prescribed recommendations that will assist them to getting to a healthier space. And when that happens, there's nothing you can do. Other than tell them the door's always open and they're always welcome to come back.
This is Sarah from earlier. She said that. So you mean companies would want you to diagnose without intending to help, but rather use it to terminate people for a mental health disorder?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty intense that they would. Well, it makes sense. I mean, who's going to fight that?
And that's the issue is that many people, especially people with mental health issues, they know they're not going to call a lawyer. Or if they do, they know their lawyer's pockets are much deeper and and they can run them out of money faster than they run out.
Well, let's go ahead and bring it in for approach to landing. What's I have my 10. So when we end broadcast, Dr. John, what I do is I'll do a rapid fire of 10 questions. But before we get to that, is there anything on your heart right now that you want to share before we go to rapid fire?
No, other than I'm not a big fan of rapid fire.
So you've seen my rapid fire. Have you seen any of them?
No, I actually haven't seen them. So
Okay. They're not intrusive. I actually comprise most of them when we're talking. When I do rapid fires, they're simply just quick answers. And if it's a question that you know that you should not answer, you say, I think we'll go to the next question and just smile.
Perfect.
The other one is, I hope I'm not giving you anxiety, by the way, because I'm not qualified to treat you for your anxiety.
No, it takes a lot to make me anxious.
Okay. And then, it's just a way to get honest answers and people get to know you. And so I want to say thank you very much. And after we end the broadcast, what I'm going to do, Dr. John, is I'm going to, maybe you and I can troubleshoot. You can send me some questions. I'll probably do 2 or 3 questions in my Spotify that maybe people can engage with, because there are some people that are probably sleeping and maybe they'll listen to it tomorrow. So we want to give them an opportunity to be a part of the conversation as well. So,
Yep.
All right, here we go. Rapid fire. Number 1, why did you do this podcast today?
Felt led to.
Career advice for anybody that is considering the field that you're in.
Make sure you have an exceedingly good supervisor in your internship and in your registration hours, because that will set your career.
Raw beef or raw fish?
Beef.
Ooh. Hawaii or Canada?
Oh, Hawaii.
Best marriage advice you ever received?
There's no leaving.
Ooh. Okay, we got to pause for a second. Can we pause?
Let me tell you, we had a few rules when we got married. Rule number 1 was there is no leaving. If you are getting married, there's no exit. There's no off-ramp. There's no threatening an off-ramp.
Is there a rest stop? Do we have a rest stop?
If you do have that, it's the word divorce is never to
Amen.
pierce one's world or lips or be part of. The other was no name calling.
Ooh.
You are not ever to use a derogatory name towards your spouse. In part, more that one was more on the female side, in that any female in here listening to this knows if you've ever been called a derogatory name by someone that has been important to you, you will have never forgot that. You will remember every detail to that. It becomes part of the fabric of who you are. So we made a rule: no name calling, no exit, no off ramp. So and of course no cheating. So because that breaches the foundation of that trust in a way that it's not that it's irreparable, but it's pretty close to irreparable. So don't cheat, don't leave, and don't call each other names. And after that, we're good.
I took notes. And how many years now, you and your missus?
Just past 24. So
24.
Yep.
You got us. I say we've been together 25. We've been married 20. It took me 5 years to become a man, and say so.
Well, we were together. This is an intro. We actually met online through the very first voice over internet protocol. It was called FreeTel, and it was the first program where you could verbally engage someone else anywhere in the world. And that's where we met. And because I'm Canadian, she's from Mississippi.
Okay.
We spoke and she had 2 kids. We spoke for 18 months before we ever met, because we knew as well, you don't date single women with kids. Like the single moms aren't in the dating world. They're they're either single and not, or they're getting married, but you're not there's kids involved. So there is no playtime here. This is serious. And so we spoke on the phone and on the internet for 18 months and oftentimes 6 hours a day. So,
kids today will never know what it means to make a sandwich. Right? I don't know if you ever heard that reference, but when you would log on to AOL Online, America Online, or whatever, you would have to use that dial-up connection. You literally had to go make a sandwich.
yeah.
Or
That lovely noise.
yeah. I had some memories of ICQ,
Yep.
AOL Instant Messenger. Yeah, I remember those good old days.
Yep.
Favorite TV show?
Oh, I don't think I have. I'm not a big. I watch TV, but I watch it usually because my wife's watching it. I'm not really a fan of. I used to be a big sports guy, and when sports went political a few years ago, I stopped watching all of them. Because again, I watch sports to enjoy them. I wasn't going there to find politics, and so it turned me off of them completely.
Yeah, I agree. And it's all fixed anyway. Okay, that's another broadcast. Rumble or YouTube?
Definitely Rumble.
I agree. We are on YouTube, we are on Rumble, but I like Rumble where they're headed. I like their mission statement. I agree with that.
Yep.
Finances or time not an issue, which includes your work obligations. If you had 30 days to spend anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I'd split it between Florida and Hawaii.
Two warm places. Question number 9 is it's a very light question because you're in Canada. Are you a Subaru owner?
No.
What? Okay. Well, what do you drive when it's like adverse weather conditions?
I drive a Mazda. My wife drives a big Ram truck.
Okay.
4x4, all that.
Last question. And this is the same question I ask everybody on every podcast is, what is your desire for the next generation? After you've long gone, what is your desire or your heart for the next generation?
For them to return to prior value and connection and concern for even just their neighbor, let alone humanity.
I feel like we need to land there and stay there just for a minute before we close. I noticed that when we were talking earlier, and you're born and raised Canada, correct?
Yes.
How connected are you to the United States in terms of like politics or news or just things that are happening? Are you pretty connected, or is it something like an afterthought for you?
No, I'm too connected.
Oh, okay.
I need to disconnect some of, because as you can appreciate where things are going, it's just distressing. I actually was speaking to someone else earlier today about how, and it's both sides. I mean, I'm not inclined to say it's A or B. It's both of them, like meaning left and right, are
Right.
having this dance that is anxious producing for anyone who's paying attention to the whole of that group. And so I don't see any of it as positive anymore.
So in your country, do you have the polarizing effect like how we do it in the United States of the being on the left or the right? Do you guys have the same climate?
We do, in so much that our political system it's similar, but it's different. We are a democracy, not a republic. And unfortunately, at least I say unfortunately because I'm in Alberta, Quebec and Ontario have the largest populace, and so they usually decide our elections. In other words, on election night, when the polls close and we turn on our TV, the election's already been decided. Our votes don't matter, because Ontario and Quebec, if they voted in a certain direction, the election's already finished.
Well, that explains why you like Hawaii so much, because that's Hawaii in a nutshell. Nobody cares about Hawaii's votes, because by the time the election is, like, Hawaii is 6 hours away. So, there was a question that I read on Twitter, on X, and it was, if the left and the right were to agree on one thing, what do you think it should be? And my response to that question of what should they both agree to, and what I said was, just stop lying. If they both agree to stop lying, and I say it'll solve all the world problems, but it would solve quite a bit.
I was going to say, if you took lying out of everything in relation to politics, it would solve you're right, a lot, because that's all, it's filled with lies.
And that's not even a political statement. That's just an honest, like, just stop lying.
That's what I mean, man. That's not a right statement. It's not a left statement. It's you all are just liars.
I think if that was a rule and you could hold checks and balances to that, I think it would be easier to move forward knowing where everybody's at. And I'm not a political person, but I will say that we have had political leaders in our country. And my dad actually brought this up. He says there are some presidents when they speak, it's almost like you got to pull out a dictionary to understand what they're saying, because there's so many words. It's so complicated. And then we have another president where I think he has 11 words in his vocabulary. And as much fun as you make fun of that person, at least you understand what he's saying. You don't need a dictionary.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if everybody would just tell the truth, I think we would know where we are clearly. And I'm not saying it'll solve all world problems. I believe we just got to come back to Jesus. That's just what I think. But
that would help too.
That would help a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that would help a lot.
Well, we're going to land the plane, Dr. John, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to end the official live stream. But as we officially end, if you don't mind hanging out in the green room, we'll just kind of do our formalities at the end.
Yep, let's do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. I really appreciate your time. And I know you've given us a lot. I know there's a lot more things we didn't talk about, and I think I'm okay with that. That gives us a reason to come back and do it again.
It does.
Thank you to all of our listeners, our viewers, both live and also in replay. And for those of you on Spotify, thank you. I do apologize, family, to any technical difficulties we may have had, but I don't control the internet, and my name is not God, so we roll with it. And we thank you. We appreciate you. Dr. John, once again, I appreciate you, brother, and I'll talk to you on the back end. Family, thank you for hanging out with us. Whenever I get a guest that has paid their dues, like Dr. John has, 30 plus years of experience in his field, I'm blessed. I am very grateful. And I'm thankful that you're here. And so to Sarah, who's been with us for hours, thank you. Dr. Heath, thank you. To Eva as well, and all those that I missed throughout the live stream, thank you for being here. And we're going to do this again. And we'll put all the link descriptions and how you can connect with Dr. John in the post description after we end this. So thank you again. On behalf of my wife, myself, our kids, our families, and Dr. John's family as well, we thank you for spending time with us today. May you be blessed. As I always say, love you guys. God bless you guys. Ahui ho, aloha, and mahalo. Yes, sir. Chihu.
Hey, what do you say? This whole town could be red by the end of the day.